Fort George, the most considerable fortress in Britain. Near Inverness, Fort George is one of the most outstanding artillery fortifications in the world. Built by a frightened Hanoverian government soon after the Jacobite uprising of 1745, it was intended as an impregnable fortress for German Geordie's army. Built at a cost of more than £200,000, double the original estimate, it cost more than Scotland's gross annual product at the time, over £1 billion at today's prices. It was the biggest single construction to be undertaken in the Highlands, but no ordinary building job. Fort George was built under the conditions of war. Like the castles which preceded it, its outer defences have a moat and a drawbridge. But for the first time in Scotland, it is a comparatively low structure, designed to withstand artillery fire. All the building materials had to be brought in by sea. Stone from quarries in the Black Isle, timber from Avach, Fowlis and Balnagowan, iron from Edinburgh. The bricks were made on site. Thousands of soldiers created the vast earthworks under the watchful eye of artillerymen. The moat could be filled at high tide by opening these sluices, although it's doubtful if it ever was. This was to be the building of a small town for 2,000 inhabitants. A tunnel leads from the main gate to the parade ground, a place where officers and their families could exercise, and ceremonial parades could take place. It has all the formality and symmetry of Edinburgh's New Town. The Governor's House is distinguished by its Doric portico and classical pediment. Next door were housed the gunners manning the fort's artillery. The rest of these buildings housed staff, storekeepers, the Lieutenant Governor and the Fort Major. Elegant classical arches and simple brick vaulting leads us to the guardroom. In 1808, standing orders required the guard to take charge of all prisoners, turn out the guard to all field officers, not to suffer people to wash at the pumps, nor to allow children or idle people to play about them, or any dirty water to be emptied near them. He is to attend to the call of the sentry at the gate, and to warn the sergeant of the guard and to keep people from walking on the grass, except officers and their families. Judging by all these marks made by bayonets being sharpened, life must have been intolerably boring for the guards at times. Barrack Square. The first buildings to be completed within the fort, and the date 1757 marks the completion of the officers' quarters. The men lived in the plainer blocks. The officers' accommodation had a slightly more imposing facade. Barrack Square is used by the army for drill to this day. The fort was almost self-sufficient. The provision stores had a bakery with the baker living above, and at the other end, a brewery. These heavy cast-iron mortars give some idea of the firepower Fort George was capable of. Weapons like these could fire a bomb almost 2.5 kilometers. One of the few modern buildings is the Seaforth Regimental Institute, built in 1934. The ordnance stores were for arms and military equipment. Even here we see the same Georgian concern for scale and proportion. Despite the ordered appearance of the barracks, life for an ordinary soldier was quite squalid. They slept 2 to a bed, 8 to a room. 1 in 100 was allowed to marry on the strength, with their wife living in with only a blanket for privacy. A 100 years later, things had improved. There were married quarters, single beds for the single men who were by now only sleeping 5 to a room. And there was some attempt at providing home comforts. During the Napoleonic Wars, officers had more space, but still Spartan accommodation. Away from the barracks is the grand magazine where the gunpowder was kept. Immensely thick walls and a stone vaulted ceiling make it strong enough to withstand a direct hit from a mortar bomb. No ferrous metals are used in the building. Even the doors are copper clad to prevent sparks. It could hold 2,500 barrels of powder. The last building to be built, almost as an afterthought, was the chapel. And even it has a military feel with its battlemented tower. Inside are the colours of regiments once garrisoned here. The Latin inscription reads, George III, by grace of God, King of Great Britain, France and Ireland, 1767. The badge of the Gordon Highlanders. No shot has ever been fired in anger over these ramparts. The Jacobite threat had vanished before the fort was completed. Carlaverock Castle, sentry to Scotland. Carlaverock Castle stands guard over the Solway Firth, close to the border with England, and for 400 years was the centre of conflict. It is everyone's idea of what a real castle should look like, with moat, high walls, towers, portcullis, and drawbridge. Translated from the original French, a contemporary account of the English siege of 1300 gives us some idea of Carlaverock's former strength. Carlaverock was so strong a castle that it feared no siege before the king came there, for it would never have to surrender provided that it was well supplied when the need arose with men, engines, and provisions. In shape, it was like a shield, for it had but 3 sides round it, with a tower at each corner. But one of them was a double one, so high, so long, and so wide that the gate was underneath it, well made and strong, with a drawbridge and a sufficiency of other defences. And it had good walls, and good ditches filled right up to the brim with water. And I think you will never see a more finely situated castle, for on one side can be seen the Irish Sea, towards the west and to the north the fair moorland, surrounded by an arm of the sea, so that no creature born can approach it on two sides without putting himself in danger of the sea. On the south side it is not so easy, for there are many places difficult to get through because of woods and marshes and ditches, hollowed out by the sea where it meets the river. After Edward I of England's invasion of Scotland, Carlaverock became a prime target. Edward's army of 87 knights and 3,000 men set up camp outside the walls with siege engines. Before long, the tiny garrison of 60 men surrendered. Some were hanged from the castle walls. For the next 12 years, Carlaverock was on the English side. Merely by changing his allegiance, Sir Eustace Maxwell kept his castle. Edward wrote off Sir Eustace's debt of £22, and almost immediately Sir Eustace threw in his lot with Robert de Bruce, King of Scots. There was another siege, but this time the castle held out, but eventually Bruce had it demolished, so that it couldn't be held against him again. It was rebuilt a few years later, when the Maxwells changed sides again. The building we see today has stonework from every age from the 13th to the 17th centuries. The central courtyard would have been the hub of castle life. Robert, 1st Earl of Nithsdale, in 1634, decided to build himself a modern house within the castle. It is one of the finest examples of Renaissance architecture in Scotland, the very height of fashion and taste. There's even a triumphal arch, and the carvings show the Maxwell family arms and scenes from classical mythology. It is as fine as any Italian palazzo. Just a few years after its completion, it was destroyed during yet another siege, this time by Covenanters against Charles I. Only the elaborately carved fireplaces give a clue to the grandeur that was once inside. summer of 1640, the Earl of Nithsdale and 200 men held Lieutenant Colonel John Hume's army at bay for 13 weeks, but eventually surrendered. An inventory taken at the time of the surrender lists among the furnishings 5 beds, each with curtains, decorated with silk lace and fringes, matching stools and chairs, 10 lesser beds and 20 servants' beds. There was a library of books and kists full of sheets, pillowcases, and towels. The Covenanting army partially demolished Carlaverock. The castle soon became redundant as a fortress, and the Maxwells moved away. It became a romantic ruin, inspiring visitors. Even Robert Burns visited it. The fine ribbed vaulting of one of the towers. This well was one of the reasons the castle could withstand sieges for so long. This is the bread oven. The drawbridge chains ran through here. Gun loops from the 16th century. The Maxwells moved their seat to Terregles, then Traquair House, where the present laird is their successor. The Maxwell family still own Carlaverock to this day.